Our next speaker is Michael Baum. He's a technology entrepreneur, disruptor, and investor. The first big data company to IPO with the single largest increase in stock price in the history of mankind, I think. 109% in one day. He took a geek idea and made it into an everyday idea. He is a 5-time entrepreneur. One of his largest companies includes Splunk, which is the first big data company. With only $40 million in funding, Splunk achieved one of the most successful technology IPOs in the last decade. He is now a partner with Rembrandt Venture Partners, working with the next generation of technology entrepreneurs. There are only a few of you, so I will need you to clap as loud as you can. Begin now. Woo! Oh, shit, yeah! Michael Baum.
That was great. Montreal Rocks. Yeah. Guys are awesome. What a great startup environment in Montreal. I was talking to somebody yesterday and they said, well, it's nothing like the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley. You guys have so many companies and so much money, and what you guys have here is so different. There's so much openness and friendship and support of each other. It may be a lot smaller than the Bay Area, but it's a really special thing you have going on. And I would say for any of you that want to go create a great company, it's exactly the kind of thing that you want to create as a culture and an environment in your company, because that will be your lasting differentiator. It'll be your lasting legacy when you leave the company, as I did. So think about that as you're starting your company. In thinking about what to talk about today, I've got this fascination now with what is a startup and what is a big idea for a startup and what is an iPhone app, as Chris Shipley was talking about yesterday. I've been fortunate enough to start a number of companies and had a number of good successes, the last one being just off the charts relative to the first 5, and I thought, well, maybe I could talk about what was different, looking back, so you guys can maybe learn a little bit from that. So what is a big idea? I don't have any way to build a taxonomy of big ideas or try to give you guys the dimensions of what a big idea is, but I think you know it when you see it, and we knew it in April of this year when we broke the NASDAQ. We literally broke the NASDAQ on April 24th, before Facebook did. And what I mean by that is we had such a demand for our stock on the morning that it opened that the bankers literally could not get institutional buyers to sell the stock to give to the retail buyers that wanted to buy the stock in the morning. And they had to delay the opening 5 hours. We didn't open until late in the afternoon. And they completely shut down the auction system at NASDAQ because they couldn't figure out how to match the orders, the buyers with the sellers. And for almost 3 days, Morgan Stanley was hand-matching buyer and offer orders. I heard people that had placed orders to buy the stock, and it took like 2 days for the order to actually clear, which is just unbelievable. Morgan Stanley told us it was the most oversubscribed IPO, 8.5 times oversubscribed that they've ever done. So that was a big idea. And I'll tell you, it's a lot of fun. If you ever get the chance to be part of an IPO, it's like nothing you'll ever experience. So a little bit about me. I've done 6 startups, 1 IPO, 5 acquisitions. But I think the most important data points for me are more than 1,000 jobs that I've been involved in creating, over 100 millionaires, which is fascinating. I mean, when you see people that you hire right out of college and 6, 7, 8 years later, they're able to buy their first house in the Bay Area, which is, no mean feat. It's a really cool thing. And it's been a 25-year journey, which until I put this slide together the other day, I didn't realize. I've been doing this for 25 years. So I'm like the old guy here. Maybe not as old as Dan Bricklin, but, I'm the old guy. So what was different about number 6? When I look at my own equity value that I created for my investors, it was far surpassing the other companies that we had started. Not to say that the others weren't great startups, they were, but number 6 was just so much different. It was a charm, as we like to say inside the company. A couple ideas about the things that I saw that were different for me. One was, and this is probably the most important thing I think to take away, is we picked a really, really big problem to solve. In 2003, when we started the company, about $350 billion was being spent annually to manage applications and data centers around the world. The human component of that, the operating expense versus the capital expense, was growing at about 3.5 times greater than any other component of that cost. So it was just out of control. People were trying to hire great IT people, great engineers to manage complex revenue-facing applications. They can't find them. About $23 billion was spent that year on software by companies trying to automate some of the management process. And we looked at that and we said, wow, that's out of whack. This can't survive. Clearly, the tools that people are using are not working if they're spending all this money and the cost is growing so quickly. We were at Yahoo. Prior to that, I was at Disney and InfoSeek, and so we were seeing this problem of web-scale applications growing out of control and being unmanageable. So we picked a really, really big, complex problem to solve. And I think if you, in thinking about your startups, can think of a big problem to solve, it gives you a lot of latitude in creating your company, because there are many facets of it that you can address. The other thing we did is we did tons of research. We spent 14 months when we started the company just doing research. Didn't cost us a lot. We spent $50,000. There were 3 of us that were co-founders of the company. We talked to 62 different potential customers. We recorded on audio all of the conversations that we had. When we started the company, we put them on an internal wiki so that anybody could listen to them. We still have people today that when they first come into the company, they listen to these interviews that we did with people managing big data centers and running big applications. And out of that came a lot of insights that drove a new business model, a new product, a new way of solving the problem, and, by the way, about 60-ish potential customers to go talk to when we had a prototype. During that time, we also built 4 or 5 different prototypes, but these weren't things that we spent a lot of time coding. They were more potential solutions to the problem, going and talking to customers about, well, what if you did it this way? What if you did it that way? We did prototype some UI stuff because we thought UI simplicity would be a big breakthrough in this area. System management products are fairly complex, traditionally, really hard to use. There aren't many people in the data center that actually touch them and use them, and we wanted to do something different than that. So our simple solution was we realized what people were dealing with was a big data problem. And in 2003, 2004, big data wasn't all the rage, but we were onto this concept of managing all of the data that was being created by the machines, the applications, the servers, the network devices. And when you looked at that as the focus of the problem versus we need more instrumentation, we need more tools to manage the instrumentation that we have, that was the old way of doing things. The new way of doing things was realizing that there was this avalanche of what we called machine-generated data that humans were trying to make sense of. And this is the reason why the human component of the cost was rising so quickly. So you take a failure like we might have at Yahoo or InfoSeek when I was there, where you've got a bunch of users that can't log in to your portal. Well, how do you diagnose that? Where do you go to even try to solve that problem? You probably got 10 or 20 or 30,000 servers and network devices. Where do you first look? That's a big data problem. And people were trying to solve this with old instrumentation and tools that just weren't working for web-scale applications. So out of our research actually came the simple solution, the whole idea for the simple solution. What we did is we decided on top of all of this data to put a search box. I mean, this is basically our invention for the company. So we backed up, we did all this research, talked to all these customers, looked at this $350 billion problem, and said, it's a search problem. And our very first product looked just like this, a search box on top of all of this complex IT infrastructure. And often early customers would say, well, I don't know what to search on. And we just say, well, just start typing. How do you Google the web? It's the same way you Splunk your data center. You're searching for login failure. You're searching for DNS record. You're searching for a router error. Just start going. And what people magically found with this was it actually helped them understand the way their data center and their applications worked. Because as they started searching all this data that was being created, and we were behind the scenes, indexing it densely and correlating it much like Google does for the web, they found it to be this magical experience. And that was the simple invention that we had come up with for a really, really complex problem. And that was the magic of the business. And that's really what the company still is today, almost 10 years later. So when you get a simple solution to a really complex problem and you execute it well, you've got a great business. So some of the other things that we did is we built an A team. And a lot of people talk about A players, they talk about hiring an A team. There aren't many people that know how to actually do this. And given the other 5 startups we had done, 2 of them I'd done with my co-founders of this company, we had learned a lot about hiring people. And I think one of the things that we did really right is we didn't hire recruiters. So we grew to be almost 300 employees before we hired our first recruiter. So how did we do this? Well, we had this saying inside the company that good enough is not good enough. And we got a lot of crap from our early investors that we weren't hiring people fast enough. In fact, we were sharing office space with another startup they had funded that was hiring people like crazy, and 2 years later, they had to lay off 100 people. And we were still at about 24, 25 people, and I think they finally started to see the wisdom in the fact that every person we added to the team was a rock star. Not only that, but every person we added to the team knew somebody else on the team, and that became the magic of the recruiting equation. We turned every single person in the company into a recruiter, and that's how we did it. This is pretty well documented if you look at hiring statistics in the US, that the average hiring mistake for a company costs about $500,000. And think, well, how could that be? I'm only paying this person $75,000 a year to support desk or something, or to write some code. Well, it's all of the opportunity cost that's built into that number that has such a big impact. And my advice would be hold out for the rock stars versus hiring somebody who's just good enough. Because in the end of the day, that's what's really going to be the difference in your business. It's building that A-player culture that I talked about earlier that you guys are building here in the startup environment in Montreal. That's your real key long-term differentiator. Oh, by the way, 50% of the hires that startups make are mistakes. So you take that 50%, that $500,000, this starts to get really expensive if you hire the wrong people. Great recruiters, by the way, make fewer than 10% hiring mistakes. So how do you find great recruiters? Well, if you're a startup, you can't pay Heidrick and Struggles $80,000 for every hire that you want to make, right? You'd be out of business in a week. What you have to do is turn your people into great recruiters. And then you're not paying anything, you're hiring people faster, you're hiring people that they know. And the number one thing that we found different in building an A-team culture within our company was every person had a best friend within the company. And a lot of recruiters will say, that's bullshit. And I'll tell you, it's not. Because when people have best friends that they're working with, they stay at work longer, they work more productively, they work and they play together, and that's really, really critical in building a high-performance, high-throughput culture. So think about who are your recruiters in your company. How do they recruit A players? How do you manage a high-performance A-player team? It's very different than the way you would manage in a classic big corporation. You give people a lot of autonomy, you send them off in their direction, you smack them in the side of the head when they're doing it wrong, and you tell them to go try again. But you don't step in and try to do their job for them. Because high-performance, high-throughput A-player environments will take those people, if they're not doing their job, they will reallocate them to a different position. And we had a lot of people like that. We had engineers that couldn't hack it. They became the best support people or the best sales engineers that we had in the company. We did a lot of moving around to people. But the system, if you build it right, will automatically take care of that. It'll spit those people out, it'll reallocate them somewhere else. If you build that high-performance culture, it will take care of itself. So some of the other things that we did differently is we did what I like to call drive in reverse. We built a business model that was very different from traditionally the way software in the enterprise had been sold. The traditional way that software was sold, I'm sure you guys have all seen the commercials on TV that CA used to run making fun of the big enterprise software person. You sell from the top down. In fact, there used to be this concept called very important top officer, which was this major marketing and selling concept in the 90s and in the early 2000s, where you'd try to find that C-level person, you'd try to write an email or a letter or send them some kind of gift in the mail just to get their attention. And we thought that was just ridiculous. I mean, how could a startup afford to do this? You'd have to hire people, put them in suits, put them on airplanes. It took a long time. It would take years to sell somebody a piece of software. So we borrowed from the open source model. We loved the fact that in open source, you could use software for free. People could share it with each other. We didn't like the open source business model, though. We thought it sucked. I mean, how many successful open source companies are there, really? Can anybody name one? How big of a company is it?
60 now.
Okay. It's really hard to create revenue in open source. Why? It's all about services, right? It's not about license revenue. I mean, Red Hat did it, but Red Hat Linux as a project had been around for 2 decades before they started the company. JBoss kind of did it, but they got bailed out by Red Hat buying them. And the guys at MySQL did it, but not very often does a big dumb company like Sun come along and offer $1 billion for your company when you're doing 40 million in revenues. So I would actually say I think it's kind of a crappy business model. And we had VCs. The guys at Kleiner Perkins told us, you got to be open source or we're not going to fund you. The guys at Sequoia said, you got to be an appliance or we're not going to fund you. We didn't like any of those models. We were software guys. We wanted to create a software company where people could use the software for free, but when they started to see value in it, they would actually pay us for the license, not for the support and the maintenance. And that's the way you create a high margin, high growth business. You can't do it by just offering support and maintenance. So what we did is we created a free download, and we became the kind of poster child for the freemium business model of going into a company, having 10, 20 people already using the software. By the time you get to that C-level person and you ask them to write a $100,000 or a $200,000 check, and they're sitting in the room with a whole bunch of people that work for them telling them, we need this stuff, we're relying on it every day, and they really kind of have no choice. And your sales process becomes less of a sales process and more of a consultative process, where you get in the room and they're asking you, well, how do we do this with it? And how do we do that with it? And you ever thought about doing this with it? And it leads to bigger sales. It leads to faster sales. We have in the company an average download to sales time of about 55 days today. That's pretty incredible when you think about the average, big enterprise software probably takes a year and a half to sell into a company. And that first sale is about $35,000 US. Within 6 months, 48% of our customers upgrade to a larger license because they find so much value in it. And that was one of the other things we did with the business model. We looked at the pricing model in reverse. We said, well, let's not charge people a whole bunch of money up front. Let's allow them to basically buy by the drink, or in our case, buy by the amount of data. So we measure the amount of data that people are indexing with our software every 24 hours, and that's what your license is geared to. We give you 500 megabytes a day for free, and then if you start to exceed that, we ask you to buy a license. And it's worked magically, but in the beginning, people told us we were crazy. You have to charge by the seat. You have to charge by the processor. We say, well, no, that doesn't really make sense, because that's not how our product works. So I would encourage you to really think about your business model. It doesn't have to be like everybody else's. It doesn't have to be what everybody else has done. You need to innovate as much with your business model as you do with your product. And if you're successful at doing that, you're going to have a really good business. One of the other things that we did is we completely ignored our competition. I can tell you this drove them nuts. We would never mention them when we talked to the press or analysts. We never posted anything on our website about them. Our sales and marketing people were told, never mention the following lists of companies. Don't even talk about the product category that they're in. And it drove them crazy. And we had half a dozen competitors when we started the company that were all way bigger than us, hundreds of employees, $50 to $500 million in revenue, and we were nowhere. They were years ahead of us, and we buried all of them. One of them just got sold to Tibco for $95 million. One of them did eventually go public, got bought by HP for a couple $100 million, and 3 of them went out of business. So not paying attention to the competition is one of the most powerful things you can do in the marketplace. And if the people from Gartner and Forrester or whoever your market research company is in your industry come along and say, well, You have to call this XYZ. You have to fit into an existing product category. The reason they want you to do that is so they can measure you against competitors. You don't want to be measured against competitors. You want to walk into a customer and say, look, Mr. Customer or Mrs. Customer, you can continue doing things the old way, or you can do things the new way. And we're the new way to do things. If you're talking about the old way, you're going to be constantly competing on price, on random features, doing long proof of concepts with customers. You walk in, you say to the customer, you want to do things the new way, and we're the way to do that. The customer will self-select. They will choose to do things the new way, in which case they're the kind of customer you want to embrace and love and work with, or they'll choose not to, in which case you move on and you don't waste time with them. I remember Mark Benioff told me this when I first met him about Salesforce. I said, Mark, how did you know in the early days, if people were going to put their CRM data in the cloud? And he said, we didn't, but what was beautiful about it is we didn't offer customers an option, and so the ones that felt comfortable putting their data in the cloud became our customers. The ones that didn't, we didn't spend any time with them. It was beautiful. We could self-select. They could help us self-select our way through the whole customer base. So this is a really powerful concept. Most marketers in at least the B2B space think this is crazy, but one of the things we did is we went for 5 years without a marketing person. People say, how'd you create such a great brand? Where'd you come up with these slogans like, take the SH out of IT and finding your faults just like mom? We didn't have marketing people. Our engineers did the marketing. They came up with all the slogans, the t-shirts. We had a very simple brand. We had nothing on our booth when you went to the trade shows. Customers would have to come up and ask, what is this thing Splunk? And at that point, they're watching a demo. And they're captive with a salesperson. So not having marketing sometimes can be a really good thing. One of the things that I like to talk about a lot is blowing things up. We did a lot of this at the company. Every single major version of the software, and we're on version 5.0 now, was a complete 90% rewrite. I mentioned earlier, we moved people around in the company a lot. We did that not only with roles, but we did that with where they would sit. The poor support guys in our company. I mean, first we made the sales guys sit next to the support guys. Then we made the engineers sit next to the support guys. Then we made the marketing guys sit next to the support guys. Why is that? They're the ones that were on the phone all the time with customers, listening to what they liked about the product, what they didn't like about the product, and overhearing those conversations for a week, a month, was a really, really powerful way to put everybody in the company in touch with the customer without sending them out to meet with people. So we change things around a lot at the company, and it's all about not getting in that status quo, in that rut with things, but constantly changing things up. So I'll just leave you with this thought that people talk a lot about changing the world as an entrepreneur, as a startup. You obviously have to figure out what that means for you, but I can tell you there's nothing more gratifying than having customers come up to you years later and say, you changed my life, you changed my career, you changed the way we did things at our company. There's nothing more satisfying than having employees that you hired, kids right out of school, and looking at them as a director or a VP in the company now, or maybe they've moved on to another company and they're a co-founder of another company that's doing really well. And they say, you changed my life, you gave me a chance. To me, that's what changing the world as an entrepreneur and a startup is all about. Thank you for having me. I think we're out of time.